That summer, by the river, the world smelled of rain on warm dust and old varnish, as if the day wore a familiar coat just for us. I was a boy of thin elbows and a mouth full of questions, always leaning a little toward whatever was patient enough to listen. Our cottage stood where the willows gathered like quiet old friends, their leaves brushing the window as the sun pressed honey into the wood. Mornings came with the soft clatter of dishes, a chorus of gulls beyond the pier, and the damp sweetness of laundry drying on a line that forgot its own name. We came to that place with our pockets full of apart from everything fears, and the simple, stubborn hope that summer could last forever. On the second day there, I found a project waiting for me by the back steps. A bundle of scraps, a dented tin can, a length of twine, and a bottle of patchy pine tar. My father's hands moved with the quiet confidence of a man who has carried boats on his shoulders and storms in his head, and somehow kept both steady. He showed me how to shave the rough edges with a blade that looked as old as the river itself, how to rub resin until the wood gave a soft, gluey sigh. The aroma rose, a lungful of warm resin and sea, tar and pine meeting sun-warmed air, a scent that tasted faintly of old stories. My mother stood at the sink, her sleeve rolled up, her face gentle as wax, and my sister hummed a tune so small it seemed a moth might learn it. We built a tiny boat from scraps and chance, and the patient insistence of my father's hands guiding mine. The hull was a pale shard of pine, the seams sealed with tar, until the joinery glowed with a stubborn shine. We lashed a few corks along the bottom to keep her afloat, tied a string to one end so I could pull her back if she wandered too far, and painted her with fingers that remembered every boat we had ever watched float away from a pier. The boat wasn't perfect. There were bruises in the wood where the knot had refused to surrender. But it held something like courage anyway, something bright and stubborn that only a boy could mistake for magic. When the tide turned and the river took on the hour when the fishermen's voices came in a low murmur from the far bend, I slid the little boat into the shallows, and the first ripple woke her. She shivered along the water like a delicate bird waking from a long nap. I stood closer and watched, the way you watch a child sleep and pretend you aren't listening to the quiet breath between breaths. My father steadied my wrist with a hand that had learned many things without saying them aloud. And then he let go. Not far from the bank, the river cradled the boat with a patient hand, and for a moment it seemed as if the water itself was listening to us, waiting to see if we would listen back. The boat drifted a little, then a little more, skimming over a current that tasted of mud and old coins. I felt the tug of the string at my finger, and then the tug of something larger. Time, perhaps, or memory, or the weight of unspoken promises that hovered at the edge of every child's breath. The world narrowed to this small vessel, this slow turning of water, this elder's smile in the corner of my eye when my father whispered, "Be gentle with her." Gentle, he had said, as if gentleness could steady a life as surely as a raft steadies a creek. That afternoon, the river gave me a lesson I would not know to name for many years. I learned that to make something true, be it a plan, a friendship, a life, one must begin with small, patient acts, with touch and attention, with letting go at the exact moment when fear wants to grip. The boat moved with a kind of lazy optimism, and I moved with it, learning to breathe with the water instead of against it. The sun lay heavy on the water, turning the surface to hammered gold, and the gulls wielding circles of silver above us, their cries soft as a memory that never quite leaves your tongue. In the days that followed, ye returned to the river as if it were a well-worn book you read aloud to gently coax yourself to sleep. I learned to watch the banks, not merely the surface, and to notice the minute changes, the way a stone shifts the pace of a ripple, the way early evening light makes the willows look like old, patient beings listening to the river's age-old stories. My father showed me how every voyage is an argument with gravity, how every voyage ends with a small, necessary return. We did not pretend the boat would conquer the river. We learned to accept that the river would cradle and test us in turns, and that to be alive there meant to choose, again and again, to listen. That summer, I learned the language of quiet abundance, the way a home-cooked meal can hold a family together, in the same way a harbour can hold a boat. The kitchen would fill with the steam of soup and the sweet, sour scent of pickles left to steep all afternoon, and my grandmother would sit at the table with her knitting and stories that moved like shadows behind her eyes. She spoke of the old country and the way the river remembers every boat that ever passed, how memory is only a boat kept busy by the hands of those who carry it. I came to understand that memory is not a possession but a practice, like mending a boat or mending a language with a patient voice until the words fit again. Now, in the quiet hours of a long life, I see that small boat as clearly as I saw it then. A fragile thing made of hope and old knots, a vessel in which a boy learned to measure his breath against the rivers. The river still sings in my ear the same song that played when the corks dipped, the same rhythm that kept time with the hammer of rain on tin. I do not pretend the world has grown any less storm-filled since those days, only that I have learned to move with it the way the boat moved with the current, never surrendering to fear, always listening for the soft, stubborn sound of hope. There are days when I cannot tell you exactly which memory poured itself into me, and which I carried away to define the man I would become. But this one I know with a quiet certainty. I grew up not under the sun's scorch, but under the patient tutelage of small acts. How to tie a knot that will hold. How to watch water until it tells you a story. How to speak to another heart with a single, unhurried glance. In every season since, I have tried to live with the same steady hands, to let patience govern the pace, to let gentleness be a form of strength rather than a soft refusal of life. There is a soft ache beside the gratitude, too, a longing for the simplicity of that summer, when the world was only as wide as the river and as forgiving as a morning that promises another chance. I loved then, perhaps for the first time, that a person could be a harbour for another's fear and a village for another's hope, all at once. I learned that to belong to a place is to receive its memory and to return it with careful, grateful care. And I learned how a child's hands can learn to prepare a vessel, not merely to cross water, but to cross a life, one patient moment at a time. If you ask me what the river gave me, I will tell you it gave me a way to see time, not as a line that drags us forward, but as a circle that teaches us to go back to what matters, and to bring something out of it for those who come next. The boat faded into the river's small, bright history, and the memory of it remains, a quiet seam in the fabric of years. It has kept me steady in the sudden rattle of news and change, and it has kept me hopeful when the days feel too long to bear. And so, with the warmth of a remembered sun on my face, and the pale echo of a boy's laughter in my ears, I say this to the quiet room. I am grateful for the river's patience, for the way it asked only that we begin with gentleness, and that we return what we borrow with care. Time will move its currents, and I will follow, mind and body growing softer like the wood that's weathered by the years.